here we are to talk about the Christ before Bethlehem this morning. I want to read portions of chapter 1 in your worship folder. It's got 1 through 14, I think. No, we actually have the separate verses. You need to read the whole chapter, but I chose to just do some selected verses in preparation for our preaching this morning. So let's read that from John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word, let me start that over. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And then skipping down to verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw His glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified about Him and cried out, saying, This was He whom I said, He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for He existed before me. Our theme for this year. For of His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. Say that aloud with me. Grace upon grace. You've heard that before, haven't you? And you'll hear it again, even though we've finished our series of bouncing back to that. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. There are so many things I like about Christmas, and I think you like those same things. There's the lights. As we made our way home, we're not often out after dark, which comes at too early, right? But as we drove home late from Rex Hospital last night, we saw lots of people that already decorated, and some on our street have their lights up already. We, the boys helped do some decorating inside, so we have a tree all lighted and a couple of other things, and we'll add to that. I don't know if you've ever driven by our house at Christmas time, but for years, decades, we've had a big star over our house. The star stayed up there all summer because, well, I don't do roofs anymore. And I would suggest to you, if you're somewhere in the category I'm in, and I'm not going to describe that category, don't do roofs, okay? Don't do ladders, okay? Not that we can't maybe find some help, but our star's not lighted yet. There's no power to it at the moment. That started with me a long time ago. And because I have some Lexington friends that I know are watching our live stream this morning, that started with me in the 60s. Randall Barnett and I built a big star. Actually, I didn't build it. I watched Randall build that big star. And he and I put that on top of the Gardenside Christian Church, which sits up on top of a hill overlooking a huge big subdivision. And that star was, I think, a wonderful witness for the congregation there, because you could see it from afar. It was big, and that one of my memories. So I thought, I want to do that myself. I do, for those of you in Lexington, I'm pretty sure that I hold the claim to being the only preacher on the roof of the church. So years ago, I built a star. Actually, we're on the second star now. But we've always had the blue star shining over our house. I love the lights. You do too. You like to decorate. You've got them inside the house and you've got them outside the house. And the Christmas music, we love our Christmas carols, and there are so many good Christmas songs other than the carols that we just know and love. And we're glad when this season of the year comes and we can listen to those. And it's family time, and we thoroughly enjoy our moments of family. And even when we can't get together geographically, we now have all this technology that we can enjoy. Seeing the pictures, I've already seen pictures of our little 3-year-old great-granddaughter in her Christmas program at her school. You know, 3 years old and she's going to school. I didn't get to go to school until I was 6. We didn't have kindergarten back in my day, in our community at least. And then you've been doing gift buy. Some of you did that early on. You've already got that in place. And if you've got the gift buying in place, now you've got the gift wrapping to do. And then there comes that wonderful time when we share all of that with our friends and our loved ones. So Christmas is, for me, just a wonderful season of the year. It was growing up, and it has been, you know, as a father and a grandfather and a great-grandfather. Some of you are great-grandparents, aren't you? A few of you. And then we could go on with that list, but I'm rambling here just to say that we paint this wonderful picture of Christmas, and yet in the midst of all of that, we must not forget that our focal point must remain that we are celebrating the birth of Jesus. And I know I'm talking to the choir, so I'm going to detract for just a moment and borrow something on my phone that I put on here just this morning. And I think I did. Well, let's see. It might be in my pictures. Let's see if it's in my pictures. Oh, there it is. Not intending to embarrass anybody, but those of you who were at the Celebration of Life saw on the back of the program one of Ann's favorite scriptures. And so Cindy Johnson turns to her devotion. Don't tell her I did this. She's taking care of the little one in the nursery. I'm reading this from just this morning. Cindy wrote, I was reminded of this yesterday at a dear friend's funeral, and then it's today's devotional. I love how God knows that I need to hear things multiple times to get it. Would all of us say, yeah, that's me? Yeah. So Cindy just put that out there. Thank you, God, for your patience. And then the devotion is from Psalm 139, the verse that we shared yesterday. Wow. So I'm thinking, as I think it would be true if I checked all of the past year's calendar, that come December, I'm going to preach about Christmas, the meaning of Christmas, and I'm going to do more than one sermon. And so, are you going to hear? Yeah, you're going to hear something you've heard before. And in my mind, in preparation, I tried to put this in context, and I'm reminded that Paul told Timothy, the things you've learned, you need to entrust to faithful people who will teach others also. And so I want to share this message with you this morning, the Christ before Christmas, by putting it in this framework that there are going to be millions of people who are going to see something about Christ in Christmas. It may be 99% of the world, but there's going to be a manger scene somewhere, and some little child whose family never takes that child to church is going to see that. And the extent of their knowledge about Christmas is the baby Jesus. And that's key to our faith, because the babe in Bethlehem was birthed by the Virgin Mary and thus conceived by the Holy Spirit, and was the fulfillment of prophecy. And we'll come back to that in the Sundays just ahead. But I'm thinking that there are a lot of people to whom we need to be witnessing whose only knowledge of Christ is the babe in Bethlehem. And so I'm not telling you this because you don't know it, I'm just reminding you, Cindy says we all need to be reminded, I'm just reminding you of what we need to encompass in our witness, because our goal in witnessing is that somebody who's never accepted Christ is going to step out in the aisle and come forward and they're going to confess their faith in Christ. We do that in a kind of semi-formal way, and you've heard me do that, and you've heard other preachers do that. So someone comes to accept Christ and be baptized, and I ask them as I lead them to say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that is a wonderful confession. That's what Peter said when Jesus said, who do people say that I am? And Peter spoke up, and this is who you are. I'm not sure that we ever exhaust learning all about who Jesus is. But he is so much more than a babe in Bethlehem, which is the only Jesus that millions of people know. And so you and I need to be sure that we're solid in our faith. We must not lose sight of the real meaning of Christmas. And while we can enjoy the festivity, as we do, I don't see anything wrong with us enjoying that. But at the same time, we need to be sure we keep our focus. I see a resurgence of faith in this day and time, don't you? I see people talking more about prayer. I used to say, as I traveled about doing the school of prayer, everybody talking about prayer ain't praying. I borrowed that from a song that says everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Everybody talking about prayer ain't praying, but we do see, I think, a resurgence of emphasis on prayer, and not my place to judge. And I see a resurgence of I'm going to say publicly on a big screen, a large dynamic announcement. I see a lot of indication of people saying that was a God thing, and we watch a lot of sports, and I always get a little thrilled when one of these very athletic guys catches the ball and runs it across the goal line, and in the end zone, they point up to heaven. That wide receiver or whoever he is that caught that ball and crossed the goal line is giving God the glory that he was able to do that. So we see a resurgence of faith, which I think we ought to interpret as an open door for us to do more witnessing. And I know this, that we want our communities in our country to be built upon strong Christian values, don't we? And if we are not verbal about that, if you need some encouragement about sharing your faith on a wide scale, you need to friend Joe Aker and read some of the things that Joe puts out there for us to remember our faith on the national scene. Thank you, Joe, for doing that. I think this is calls for us to be strong in our Christian convictions. Peter, this is one of Wayne's favorites. Peter says, be ready always to give a reason for your faith. Be ready always, so our mission is to tell the world who Jesus is. And so that confession, Jesus is the Christ. I don't think we have to necessarily give somebody a test. You don't have to, it's not like getting your driver's license. Yeah. The last time I did mine by mail this time, I picked that up from Jimmy, I think. I did mine by mail. And so I didn't have to do any kind of interchange with that crowded office that you all don't like to go to. But the last time that I did it in the crowded office, I was going through the signs, and the examiner on the other side took kind of pity on me when one of them I didn't recognize, and he dropped me a hint so I could pass my test. We're not going to give somebody a written test. I would share this with you, though, that way back, still in youth ministry, I saw that sometimes there was a rush to the baptistry without a full understanding of all that it meant. And so I made up my mind I was going to study with those who wanted to be baptized. And I got a box full of study books, and I tried to do a study with those who wanted to be baptized. And it wasn't like giving them a test, although the workbooks that we use actually did that. But the point I'm getting to is, while you and I are still learning more and more about Jesus, we need to ingrain in those that we try to lead to Christ as much about who He is, what they're really saying when they say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ. You're saying a whole bunch more than He was a babe in Bethlehem. So hurry on, LT, before your clock runs out, right? So John in his gospel gives us, I think, some great insight. Matthew and Luke tell us about the babe in Bethlehem, and that's a beautiful story, and we love that, and it's key to our faith. John, on the other hand, gives us a different picture, because he tells us that before Bethlehem, there was Jesus. In the beginning was the Word. There's great insight in that. And the Philippian letter tells us, Paul said to the Philippians, that Jesus already existed. Get that? He didn't begin in Bethlehem. He began in the flesh in Bethlehem, but Jesus, Paul said to the Philippians, already existed. And I think I tagged this Roman passage I want to read. It's in chapter 11, and verse 36. Reads, for from Him, Jesus, right? For from Him and through Him and to Him are all things. To Him be glory forever. And so we get this full picture that, as John reminds us in the beginning of his gospel, our faith is in God, and he tells us right there that Jesus was there in the creation of the universe. So He is, among other things, creator. And so when He arrived in Bethlehem, John would say, He came unto His own things. He came to that manger, that stable. He came to a place which was a part of what He had created, because He helped in all of creation. He came into His own. That's a happy thing, isn't it? Yeah. If you've ever built a house, you worked on it for weeks or months or a long time, then you got to move into that house, that's a good thing, I've probably mentioned before, Jim Crockett, he was a part of our North Raleigh, you know Jim and Bobby. They had this beautiful antique house, in 1902 I think it was built, and they wanted to build this big garage, and it had to match the house because they were part of the historical district. And that was when I was preaching North Raleigh, and we were bivocational. We were helping to earn our livelihood by doing other things. Jim hired Brandon and I to build that, and we built this two-story, bigger than that, garage to match their house. So if you drive up Main Street sometime, you can see our handiwork still standing. and we worked on that. When it was finished, it was a joy to see it completed, So Jesus came So he was physically, visibly, his own world that he had helped God create. And then there is this sad story, and his own people received him not. And that echoes, does that not echo today, that Jesus looks upon his earth, his beautiful earth, and here are all of these millions of people who receive him not. But our point is that Jesus partnered with God in the creation of all that God had made. And here's good news that we read in our text. It's in that first chapter. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. That's who we are. Children born not of natural descent, not of human descent, but born of God. He's talking about born again Christians. So the Hebrew writer is going to begin his message, and I want to share that with you too, to reinforce what we've just said. The first two verses of chapter 1, Hebrews. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets, in many ways, I think the King James says it in divers manners, he spoke unto the prophets. In these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. God spoke through his Son. So John calls him a word. When we speak, that's our tool of communicating. Words are our communication tools, right? And so words represent things, and words represent ideas. Without words, it's difficult for us to communicate. So we use words a lot, don't we? A word is an expression of a thought or an idea or a truth. And so God was in heaven, and here are the people he's created on earth. And so for us to fully understand, we need to see God in our language. Do you ever get a little frustrated when you're somewhere and the language is different than what you know, and you wonder, what are they talking about, or are they talking about me? That's a little unnerving, isn't it, when you hear somebody else in another language? For us to get a picture of God, God had to be translated into our language, and that language is what John's trying to tell us when he said, and Jesus, he's using the name word, became what? Became flesh. God took on, in Jesus, took on a body like ours, because we can see and understand that. You can listen to that, talk to that, have a meal, you go fishing, right? That's what they did. Jesus went fishing with him because that was their language. Language of some of you too, right? You would have done well in Jesus' day because you'd have been fishing, and Jesus would have come and helped you on those days when you didn't catch anything. I do it this way. God had something to say, and we know what he had to say. He wanted to say, I love you. That's the core of God's message. In order to say that, he needed to show us his love, and so he sent Jesus as the communicator, as the Word. Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And John says, and we beheld his glory. We could understand something of the glory of God when we look at Jesus. And I guess if we somehow could have a time machine and be among the apostles, we would have loved that, to have had that close communication and understanding with him. We get a full picture of that because what they saw and heard, they wrote down, and so it flows to us through what? Through words. And the Word became flesh. That was God. He had something to say, and he found a way to say it. And so Jesus would say to Thomas, if you've seen me, Philip, you've seen the Father, right? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. God in our language. So how can we do Christmas right? Well, the way we can do that is to be sure we keep our focus on the fact that we are, above all else, celebrating Jesus. And we can do that by reinforcing our understanding of Jesus far beyond the babe of Bethlehem, as precious and key as that is to our faith, to include all that we can learn and know about Jesus. Paul said this to the Colossians in reference to God, but it fits so well as you apply it to Christ. Paul said he was praying, among other things, for the Colossians, they'd get to know God better and better. Just love that. Is that not what we do as we worship Sunday by Sunday, as we do our devotions day by day? We get to know God better and better. We already know Him, and you can still grow in the development of that relationship. I love that song. It said, "Closer, I want to live closer to Jesus." Don Moen's song, "I just want to be where you are, living daily in your presence." We get to know God better and better. We'll just apply that to Jesus. In this Christmas season, we want to get to know Jesus better and better. Spend a lot of time with Him, right? That's one of the ways you do that. So we need to make sure our faith is unshakable. All of those things that relate to Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. We need to keep worship as our priority. I know that we all run out of time. There's more things to do than we can possibly get done. Things that will interfere with our intent to worship. We need to let our spiritual motivation be the driving force behind or underneath of our gifting. Let me say that again. We need to let our spiritual motivation be the driving force of our gifting. Ponder that as you go through the rest of the day and the week. And while we enjoy all of the festivities, and we've already begun to do some of that, let's never let that overshadow the real meaning of Christmas. So there we have it. We'll wrap it up right there and leave you with a challenge to pray that God will put somebody in your path who needs Jesus, and you can show them the babe in Bethlehem, and then go beyond that to show them the Christ of Calvary. Let's stand as we sing.